Every few months, a video of an American house being destroyed by a tornado spreads across the internet. The roof lifts away, the walls collapse, and pieces of timber are scattered across a field. In the comments, someone inevitably compares it with a brick cottage in England, France, or Germany that has stood for several hundred years. The verdict seems obvious. European homes are solid, while American homes are cheaply built. Of course, there is some truth behind that statement, but it's not the whole story. Many European houses are heavier, quieter, and capable of remaining in use for centuries. In England alone, roughly 1 in 5 homes still standing today were built before 1919, among the oldest housing stock anywhere in Europe. Most American houses were never designed around that same expectation of permanence. But why is that the case? Well, this isn't really a story about bad building technique. It's a story about two different ideas of what a house is for. One built to last, and one built to keep up. And you don't need to compare two countries to see that difference. You just need to open a wall, literally. Pull back the drywall in most American homes, and you'll find narrow wooden studs surrounding an empty cavity. Open a traditional European cottage, and you may hit brick, stone, or a beam as thick as your leg. So why did the American wall become so thin? And after all its weaknesses became clear, why did the country keep building it? It begins in the early 1830s with a shortage of skilled workers in a muddy settlement beside Lake Michigan. Way before Chicago became a city, builders on both sides of the Atlantic generally agreed on how a proper wooden house should be constructed. They used heavy timber framing, with enormous oak beams shaped by hand and locked together with mortise and tenon joints. Picture a square hole cut into one beam, and the end of another shaped down to fit snugly inside it. No nails, just wood locked into wood. But cutting those joints accurately required years of training. A young carpenter usually worked under an experienced master, gradually learning how to select timber, understand its movement, and shape each connection. Since every beam was slightly different, the frame depended on the judgment of the people building it. Without those craftsmen, construction slowed down or stopped completely. Europe relied on this system for centuries, although the growing density of its cities eventually exposed a serious weakness. Timber buildings stood close together along narrow streets, allowing a fire to travel rapidly from one roof to the next. In 1666, a fire that began in a London bakery burned for 4 days and destroyed more than 13,000 houses. The rebuilding laws that followed placed strict limits on timber construction and required many new buildings to use brick or stone. Copenhagen experienced similar destruction in 1728 and again in 1795. After the second fire, authorities imposed tighter restrictions on half-timbered construction in the city. The shift away from wood was accelerated by centuries of severe deforestation across Europe, which had depleted the continent's mature forests for shipbuilding and fuel. By the beginning of the 19th century, much of urban Europe had spent generations moving toward heavier construction. Brick and stone worked well for established cities where buildings stood close together, skilled trades were already available, and the same house might be expected to serve several generations. America was about to face a very different problem. Going back to the early 1830s, Chicago was a small settlement built on wet, difficult ground beside Lake Michigan. At the time, only a few hundred people lived there, but new trade routes were transforming the region fast. The Erie Canal had opened in 1825, connecting the Great Lakes with markets farther east, while land speculation and westward migration brought increasing numbers of settlers through the area. Chicago officially became a town in 1833. Its population had already grown dramatically, and within 4 years, it exceeded 4,000 people. Families arrived faster than local builders could provide houses, shops, warehouses, churches, and barns, and every approaching winter increased the urgency. The European method required time, mature hardwood beams, and trained craftsmen. And although Chicago had plenty of trees and sawmills, it had almost no carpenters who could cut those tricky joints by hand. A settlement adding thousands of residents could not spend several weeks waiting for a specialist crew to complete the frame of every small house. The shortage created the first major divide between American and European housing. European construction had developed within places where skilled trades and permanent settlements already existed. American construction had to follow a moving population across enormous distances, often reaching a new settlement before experienced builders arrived. So in 1832, a carpenter named George Washington Snow built a warehouse near Chicago using a radically lighter frame. Instead of raising enormous beams connected through handcrafted joints, he used long, narrow pieces of machine-cut lumber. These studs extended continuously from the foundation toward the roof and were fastened together with nails. While basic variations of light framing had appeared sporadically in earlier history when builders were desperate for speed, Snow was the first to industrialize the concept. The frame looked almost impossibly thin beside a traditional timber structure, yet it required less wood in each individual piece, fewer specialized tools, and far less training to assemble. Where a heavy timber wall held its strength in a handful of massive, hand-fitted joints, Snow's wall held it in dozens of thin studs, nailed rather than notched. A small crew could repeat the same simple connections throughout the building, allowing walls to rise much faster than they could under the old method. You see, Snow's experiment depended on two technologies that had recently become widely available. Steam-powered sawmills could produce large quantities of boards with consistent dimensions, while machine-made nails had become far cheaper than the individually forged nails used by earlier builders. Standard lumber and inexpensive nails allowed construction to be divided into simple, repeatable tasks. For the first time, the thinness of the wall was an advantage. It meant less weight to move, fewer skills to master, and more buildings completed before winter. But could they survive the test of time and the environment? Well, the following year, carpenter Augustin Deodat Taylor used a similar frame for St. Mary's Catholic Church in Chicago. Older carpenters laughed at the thin studs and reportedly said the building was so light it would blow away like a balloon. But the church stayed up, and the insult became the name of the method: balloon framing. Some historians offer another explanation. French-speaking builders in Missouri used maison en boulon, meaning a house made of boulons, the light poles used to support scaffolding. English speakers may have heard boulon as balloon. Whatever the origin of the name, the frame's apparent weakness was also the source of its usefulness. Heavy beams were difficult to transport, lift, and shape, while narrow boards could be carried by a few workers and nailed into place. Settlers who could never afford a master carpenter now had a realistic way to build a house, barn, or store. So far, so good. So by the 1840s and 1850s, balloon framing spread across Chicago and into other rapidly growing parts of the United States. Railways and canals carried standardized lumber into new settlements, while printed plans allowed builders to repeat familiar layouts. The frame could be covered with wooden siding on the outside and plastered on the inside, creating a complete house with the thick masonry walls common in many European cities. But a wall designed for speed carried a danger straight through its center. Yes, balloon framing left open vertical cavities that could carry fire rapidly from one floor to another. American towns also placed large numbers of timber buildings close together, recreating some of the same dangers that had pushed European cities toward concrete centuries earlier. In 1871, the Great Chicago Fire burned across the city for 2 days, destroyed thousands of buildings, and left around 100,000 people homeless. The disaster revealed how quickly a predominantly wooden city could burn. So Chicago strengthened its fire regulations, especially within the commercial center where brick, stone, and other fire-resistant materials became increasingly important. So if the weakness was now obvious, why did light framing survive? Why did the Americans continue to build in a similar manner despite the dangers? Well, because the economic pressures that had created it had not disappeared. America still had vast timber resources, large areas of land, and communities that needed homes faster than masonry construction could usually provide them. So as time passed, builders changed the dangerous part without surrendering the speed. Balloon framing was gradually replaced by platform framing, where each floor is built as a separate platform and the walls for the next story are raised on top. This arrangement uses shorter studs, simplifies construction, and stops fire from traveling straight up through the inside of the walls. Open the wall of a platform-framed house, and the difference is right there. The open shaft is gone, broken up floor by floor, with fire blocks nailed in between. The new system kept the qualities America valued most. Lumber could be standardized, construction could be divided among crews, and houses could be produced quickly in nearly any part of the country. Those priorities became even more important as cities expanded, suburbs spread, and millions of families entered the housing market. By then, the two continents were building around different expectations. In many European communities, a masonry house could be renovated and passed from one generation to the next. In America, land developed rapidly, neighborhoods changed frequently, and houses became products that could be expanded, altered, sold, or eventually replaced. This helps explain why an American wall can feel disappointing to someone accustomed to European construction. But it still does not explain why such a light structure survived across an entire continent after migration and population growth had stabilized a bit more. Well, the frame survived because it proved unexpectedly useful against three very different challenges posed by the American landscape. The first challenged the assumption that heavier always meant safer. During the 1933 Long Beach earthquake, old brick and stone buildings without steel reinforcement crumbled. Their heavy, brittle walls could crack and collapse as the ground shifted beneath them. California responded with stronger seismic regulations, particularly for schools and vulnerable masonry structures. A well-designed wooden frame is relatively light and can flex as the ground moves. Modern connections, shear walls, anchor bolts, and structural panels transfer earthquake forces through the frame and into the foundation. These features do not make every wooden house safe, especially when it is old or poorly maintained, but they show why replacing timber with ordinary brick would not automatically improve American housing. Second, the wind came for it. A violent tornado can destroy wooden houses, brick houses, and many commercial buildings. Making every home strong enough to resist a direct strike from the most powerful tornadoes would require measures far beyond ordinary residential construction. American building policy has therefore placed considerable emphasis on protecting occupants through basements, storm shelters, safe rooms, improved roof connections, and stronger local codes. Masonry cladding may remain after lighter parts are torn away, but standing brick does not necessarily mean the structure survives safely. Third came the climate. Much of the continental United States experiences hot summers, severe winters, and repeated freeze-thaw cycles. Wood framing allowed builders to create insulated wall cavities without constructing extremely thick solid walls. As heating systems, insulation products, vapor control, and air conditioning developed, those cavities became part of the way American houses managed large seasonal temperature changes. Passing those tests did not erase the weaknesses people notice. Many American houses could be built with better soundproofing, more durable finishes, tighter quality control, and greater attention to long-term maintenance. Some developers have used the efficiency of wood framing to deliver affordable homes, while others have used it mainly to protect profit margins. The comparison with Europe also varies by country and region. Britain, Italy, Germany, Spain, Finland, and Sweden do not share one universal method of construction. Parts of Scandinavia have long traditions of timber housing, while many modern European homes use concrete blocks, reinforced concrete, engineered wood, or combinations of several systems. Ironically, parts of modern Europe are now moving back toward timber, with several countries adopting engineered wood and prefab framing alongside brick and concrete, the same industrial logic Chicago pioneered 2 centuries earlier, arriving in reverse. America also contains brick houses, concrete buildings, historic timber frames, adobe structures, and regional traditions that do not fit the familiar suburban image. Now, return to that tornado video. The scattered wooden house and the old European cottage still look like a simple comparison of bad and good construction. But open the wall of each one, and you're really looking at 2 different answers to the same question. Does a house need to last 3 centuries, or does it need to exist by next winter? George Snow's warehouse and Augustine Taylor's church have both disappeared, but the wall they invented is still standing behind almost every drywall panel in the country. That's the trade you're looking at every time a storm peels a roof off. Fewer workers, less time, more houses built, and walls thin enough to fall on schedule. Finland answered the same question differently. While much of urban Europe moved toward heavier materials, Finland held on to wood and built log houses that still stand centuries later. Click the video on your screen to discover what Finnish builders understood that no one else did.